Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. My name is Camille, and I am 32 years old. At my own birthday dinner, my sister announced that she was pregnant with my husband's child. Before that night, I had imagined many versions of how my 32nd year would begin. With a quiet toast, with a clean decision to start fresh with a pottery class and an early morning run by the lake, with a promise to be kinder to myself. I did not imagine what actually happened. The ivory room in Chicago's Gold Coast glowed with a soft, flattering light that made everything look gentle. My friends and family were gathered around a long mahogany table dressed in white linen, silver flatware, and tulips drooping elegantly in crystal vases. Waiters moved like a choreography, setting down plates and pouring wine as if nothing in the world could go wrong. Sabrina, my sister, stood near the center of the room with her hand placed theatrically on the small curve of her stomach. Devin, my husband of 5 years, stepped to her side. He placed his hand on her shoulder with a tenderness that had somehow evaporated from our marriage months ago. His mouth formed the pitying look he had mastered in our home, the one he used when I asked how late he would work, or whether he remembered our anniversary. "We are a family now," Sabrina said, and her words were not soft. They were shaped like a blade. She expected me to dissolve, to break, to weep. That had always been the role assigned to me. I did not oblige her. I took a slow sip of Pinot Noir and let silence grow in the room the way winter grows over a lake, gradual, relentless. I watched the discomfort spread from face to face like a cold wind. My mother, Carolyn, flushed and looked down at her hands. Several of our friends stared at me and then at Sabrina, unsure whether to speak. The waiter froze with a water pitcher, unsure whether to finish his pour. "To family," I said, when the silence had almost reached its limit. "And to the truth." My voice did not shake. I raised my glass just slightly, and I watched Devin's expression falter on his face. He was not prepared for the version of me who stood in that quiet, who was not a ruin. Growing up, I was the steady child. If the car broke down, I called the mechanic. If the rent went up, I worked extra shifts at the library and reorganized our budget. Sabrina was the one who gleamed. When she wanted a designer gown for homecoming, our parents cashed a savings bond. When I needed funds for an advanced placement textbook, I was told to apply for a part-time job and consider used copies. I learned to hold things together because no one else would do it for me. They mistook my steadiness for a lack of feeling, my quiet for weakness. That was their first mistake. The second mistake was assuming I would not look for the truth. 6 weeks earlier, on an ordinary Tuesday, I had reached for the shared family tablet in our kitchen to look up a lemon chicken recipe. A notification pinged in the corner. An email from Sabrina to Devin with a subject line that said, "Our plan." A tremor started in my chest. I knew better than to open it. I opened it anyway. The message that unfolded on the screen was meticulous, merciless. The affair was not only real, it was logged like a project: dates, secrecy measures, next steps. At the bottom, a line almost tidy in its cruelty: "Announce at Camille's birthday. Use the public pressure to get her to agree to a quiet divorce. She will be too broken to fight. She never fights back." The tablet slipped from my hand and hit the tile floor. The crack of it ricocheted off the cabinets and into my bones. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against it as if the world were trying to force itself through the wood. I did not scream. I did not sob. I opened my mouth and a soundless breath left me, a private storm that lasted exactly as long as it took to empty my lungs. Then I inhaled, and that breath was iron. I called Nicole, my best friend since freshman year of college. She is a paralegal who reads form contracts like novels. "Nicole," I said, and my voice was steady. "It is happening." "Where are you, Camille?" she asked, the worry quick and human in her voice. "I am home," I said. "I am not going to fall apart. I am going to burn it down, not with chaos, but with documentation." The affair was not the whole story. It was an infection that hid a deeper sickness. For years, Devin and I had been trying to conceive a child. I tracked cycles. I took vitamins. I sat with fertility forums at midnight, reading other women's stories the way people memorize maps. A year earlier, after months of discussions, Devin had finally agreed to be tested. He insisted on going alone to Northwood Clinic in Lincoln Park. That evening, he came home carrying a gentle performance. He held me while I cried and whispered that I should not blame myself. He told me the doctor said he was fine. He told me the problem had to be me. He said there was nothing to be done except give it time and be patient. He let me go to sleep carrying a weight that did not belong to me. After I read Sabrina's email, I could feel the lie beneath that night like a foundation poured wrong. I began to pick at every seam in our life where the story did not hold. I remembered how he had said the tests were expensive, thousands of dollars, specialist consultations. I pulled up our joint bank account statements from that month. There was no payment to Northwood Clinic, but there was a cash withdrawal of $20,000. Nicole, I said into the phone 2 days later, I need the actual results from Northwood. From a year ago. She exhaled slowly. Camille, those records are protected. It is a fortress of health privacy law. I am his wife, I said. There must be a door in the fortress, and I will find whoever is holding the key. We found it through a combination of consent forms Devin had left in a folder in his office desk, a notary at a copy shop in Hyde Park who remembered his signature, and an insistent, careful sequence of phone calls in which we never lied, but never volunteered more than necessary. 2 weeks later, an email landed in my inbox with a password-protected attachment and a sentence that said, as requested. I typed the password twice because my hands were shaking. The report from Northwood loaded like a polished knife. I scrolled past the measurements and numbers that looked at me like a foreign language. A summary sat at the bottom in clean font. Patient exhibits 0 sperm motility. Diagnosis, azoospermia. Sterile. The word did not shout. It rested there, terrible and calm. The lie became complete in that instant. He had not only betrayed me with my sister, he had used my hope as a stage on which to pretend to be compassionate. He had watched me carry a blame that science would have taken off my shoulders in a minute. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall until the wall was only the color of paint. Then I went into our home office and opened a notebook, and on the first page I wrote, "Follow the money." If the clinic bill never existed, what had the cash withdrawal paid for? I called a private investigator whose name I took from a colleague of Nicole's, a quiet older man named Leonard Brooks who wore a sweater vest even in summer and spoke in measured sentences. I slid a folder across his desk with a summary of dates and accounts and the names of the players as I understood them. "I do not need you to confirm the affair," I said. "I need you to trace the funds. Everything else can wait." Leonard nodded as if I had told him the weather report. He said that he would be in touch. He was. Meanwhile, at home, I performed normalcy like a ritual. Devin texted that he would be late 3 nights a week. I set the table. I marked a faint smile on my face when he came through the door at 10:30 and kissed my temple as if it were routine. I said goodnight. In the morning, I took a long walk along Lake Michigan, a scarf wrapped tight around my neck, and I let the wind blow questions into me. Leonard called me exactly 12 days after our first meeting. He said I would like to go over something in person. When we sat again in his quiet office in River North, he placed a neat stack of paper in front of me. He had a way of arranging documents that made them feel inevitable. The $20,000 had flowed into a shell account registered under a bland umbrella corporation. From there, regular transfers appeared like a rhythm. Rent for Sabrina's apartment in Wicker Park, car payments, designer purchases that matched the bags she carried to brunch. I listened quietly, and I turned the pages. There was more. Leonard's finger touched a single line on a page near the bottom. $200,000 from Devin's corporate expense account, moved quietly to a title company in Oak Park. The record ended with a deed in my mother's name for a house whose photographs made my jaw lock. A handsome brick with a porch and a maple in the front yard. "It is a conspiracy," I said. "Not an affair. A structure built carefully to move money and burdens to other people's names while using my life as a buffer." Leonard did not nod. He simply sealed his manila envelope and slid everything back into it. "I will send you a digital copy," he said. "Keep both." I did not let myself shake. I drove home down Lakeshore Drive beneath sky that had the pale color of a bruise. I parked, walked upstairs to our apartment, and placed the envelope on the kitchen counter like it was a stone I had carried from a river. Then I called Nicole. I told her everything. She was silent for a long time, and then she said, "We are going to plan this. No improvisation. Only evidence." We planned. I printed the medical report and placed it in a clear folder. I printed Leonard's findings and placed them behind the clinic report. I made copies. I put one set in a safety deposit box at a bank in the Loop. I gave a set to Nicole. I kept one in my purse. The day of my birthday dinner arrived with a sunset that made the city blush. I chose a dress that made me feel like myself, Simple black, sleeves to the wrist, a neckline that did not apologize. Nicole arrived early and squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "you are the author of what you say next." At the ivory room, the host smiled and led us to the private dining room. Sabrina wore a white silk dress and a delicate gold chain around her throat. Devin wore a navy suit and the ring I had chosen for him when I still believed that choosing meant something permanent. My mother looked like a portrait, tasteful jewelry, hair done, eyes bright in a way that made my stomach hollow out. Dinner began with polite conversation that felt like a rehearsal for a play I had not agreed to perform. The first course arrived. Everyone complimented the soup. A toast was proposed by a friend from my workplace. I thanked her. I waited. Then Sabrina rose. She placed a hand on her stomach. Devin moved beside her. She announced what she announced. I watched the words land like hailstones on the table. I watched the calculation in Sabrina's eyes because she expected an eruption. She expected to be shielded afterward as someone guided me to a car and made sure I got home and tucked into bed with tea and a blanket, because that is what I do when someone else falls apart. I did not fall apart. I raised my glass and said, "To family." And to the truth. My voice spread across the table and settled. I took the folder from my purse and slid it down the table to Devin. The room leaned toward the motion. Devin frowned as he picked it up. "What is this?" he asked. "It is the truth," I said, "from Northwood Clinic last year." For a single moment, everything in Devin's expression emptied out. He knew exactly what he was holding. He knew without reading the summary. His hand tightened on the folder. I watched Sabrina glance at his face with a confusion that tasted like fear. "The largest betrayal," I said quietly enough that people had to lean in but loudly enough that everyone heard, "was not that you slept with my sister. It is that you pretended you could be a father." A sound rose from the room that did not have a name. Sabrina's hand flew from her stomach to the edge of the table. Her eyes flickered down to herself and back up to me, understanding blooming the way bruises do. Suddenly, and with a promise of more pain tomorrow. "You cannot," Devin stammered. "You cannot." "I can," I said, "and I am not finished." I turned the second set of papers so that my mother could see her own name on a deed. "Carolyn," I said gently, "that house in Oak Park is beautiful. The front porch looks like a photograph we could have taken when we were children. But the $200,000 used for the down payment came from Devin's company. When the internal audit ends, they will ask for it back." My mother's mouth parted and stayed open. She looked at the deed as if the letters would reorganize into a safe version of the truth. They did not. The room shifted from stunned to volatile. Devin lunged, knocking a glass off the table, his face a tight, furious mask. "You set me up," he shouted. "You vindictive." Security appeared as if conjured. Two men placed their hands on Devin's arms and asked him to step back. He jerked once, and then twice, and then allowed himself to be led away through the double doors. The last thing I saw of him that night was the back of his suit as it disappeared into the hallway, and I felt only a deep, quiet settle in my chest. Sabrina made a small sound like someone waking suddenly. She grabbed my wrist. "Camille, please," she said, her voice thin with a fear I had not heard from her since we were children, and she had woken from a nightmare. I looked down at her hand on me, and then back at her face. "Savior, please," I said, not unkindly. "Call Trent. He deserves to know that he is going to be a father." I pulled my wrist free gently. She did not reach for me again. Nicole was at my side before I could take a step. She did not say anything. I did not either. We walked out together. The heavy doors closed behind us, insulating us from the sounds of a life that no longer belonged to me. In the quiet vestibule, I took a breath that felt like the first breath I had taken in months. Nicole squeezed my shoulder. "You were perfect," she said. "Perfect is not what I aimed for," I said. "Only true." The 6 months that followed were measured with calendars and signatures, with depositions and quiet notaries. Devin's company moved quickly once the internal audit grew teeth. Statements turned into reports. Reports turned into charges. My attorney recommended that we cooperate fully, which we did. In exchange, my part of the nightmare ended sooner and cleaner than I had dared to hope. I moved into a small apartment in Bronzeville with a narrow balcony that looks over Lake Michigan like an eye watching the horizon. I bought an orchid at a garden store on clearance, its leaves bruised, its flowers gone. The clerk said it might not make it, and I said we will see. Nicole came over on Sundays with bagels. We taught ourselves to make bowls on rented pottery wheels at a studio a few blocks away. At first, my bowls were more like collapses. The clay slid between my fingers, as if I did not deserve to form it. Over time, my hand steadied. My teacher, a woman named Carol who kept her gray hair in a neat knot, showed me how to breathe at the right moment so the clay would rise. One Tuesday afternoon, while the wheel hummed and I tried for the 5th time to center a heavy lump of stoneware, Nicole flicked a bit of clay playfully in my direction. "Is the divorce final?" she asked, stretching the word as if it were an elastic band. "As of this morning," I said, and I felt the answer settle into place inside me like furniture in a room that finally fits. The company settled favorably. They prefer to keep their debts and their scandals off a public docket. My phone buzzed on the table. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. A news alert from a local station in Chicago in plain font read, "Former finance executive Devin Carter sentenced to 5 years for embezzlement." There was a gray photograph of him being led in handcuffs down a polished hallway. I stared at the image for a long moment. I waited for heat to rise in me. It did not. I felt no triumph and no sorrow. The chapter was already closed. I turned my phone face down and looked back at the clay. "Where were we?" I said to Nicole, and spun the wheel again. It is astonishing how the body remembers what it once feared it could not do. In the months after the dinner, language returned to me in full sentences. Appetite returned. I went to the farmer's market in Hyde Park and bought peaches that dripped down my wrist. On weekends, I visited the Art Institute and stood in front of paintings that reminded me how color can mean an entire life. One evening, as the sun went down over the lake and laid a path of light on the water, my mother called. I almost did not answer. Then I did. Her voice was quiet, as if she were calling from a chapel. "Camille," she said, "I was wrong." I said nothing. She said, "I knew pieces. Not all of it. That is not an excuse." I let Sabrina tell me the version that was easiest to hold. When the truth arrived, it was too late to stop the damage. "I am sorry." I looked out at the lake until the horizon sharpened into a line. "I believe you are sorry," I said. "That does not return the money to the people Devin harmed. It does not return my years. But it matters to me that you said it." She asked if we could speak again, and I said yes, but slowly. She agreed. I did not promise more than that. Sabrina called me a week later. I watched her name flash on my phone until it vanished to voicemail. She sent a message, "I need to talk to you." I did not reply. The next day, a second message arrived. I told Trent everything. He wants to be involved. I am trying to do the right thing. I typed and erased several responses. Then I wrote, "The right thing also includes leaving me alone for now." She wrote back, "I understand." That was the first time since we were 15 that she had written those words to me without a condition. I set my phone down and felt the smallest piece of something unknotted inside me. On a Saturday morning, the orchid on my balcony showed a small, tight bud where there had been only a dry spike 2 months before. I stood looking at it with my coffee warming my hands, and the bud looked back at me like a secret it was willing to keep if I could be patient. After the legal matters settled, I found work at a community arts nonprofit near Bronzeville that needed someone to manage schedules, coordinate events, and keep the budgets honest. I knew how to do those things. I liked placing structures around other people's gifts. One afternoon, during a ceramics workshop, a teenager named Lena sat in front of a spinning wheel and told me that every time she tried to center the clay, it slid away as if it wanted to leave. I said, "It might be that your hands are telling it to run. Try telling it to stay." She laughed and said, "That sounds like advice about my ex-boyfriend." And we both laughed because neither of us wanted advice, and yet there we were. The winter deepened. The water along the lake hardened. I walked along the shoreline in a coat that could have served as armor and watched the steam rise off the surface on the coldest mornings. The city glittered in that hard way that is almost tender. A few weeks after Devin's sentencing, I received a letter from the court. Restitution would be paid to the company, with a portion reserved for household funds that had been misappropriated from our accounts. I put the letter in a file and then moved on with my day. It felt like receiving the receipt for an item I had long since returned. Once, while waiting for the train in the loop, I saw Trent across the platform. He saw me too. He walked over carefully, as if approaching a wild creature that might bolt. "Camille," he said, "I am sorry for all of it. I did not know the things I should have demanded to know. I am going to be part of the baby's life. I want to do it right." I looked at him and saw a man who was trying to stand up in a storm he had not chosen. "Do it right," I said. "That is between you and your child." He nodded. He did not ask me for absolution. The train arrived and I stepped on. That was enough. Nicole and I kept making bowls. Sometimes we made terrible ones and broke them for the satisfaction of breaking them. Sometimes we made bowls that felt so balanced in the hand that you could forget to breathe. One evening, she invited a few of our friends to my place, and we ate soup out of the bowls we had made, and we went around the table telling stories we had not thought to tell each other before. Later, standing at the sink, Nicole rinsed a bowl and said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not picked up the tablet that day?" I said, "I think the truth finds a way in. Perhaps it would have been an envelope left on a bus seat, or a stranger's careless comment, or a piece of mail addressed wrong. I cannot imagine living forever with the lights off." Spring arrived the way it always does in Chicago, tentatively at first, with gray days testing the ground, then suddenly, with tulips and rain and a softness that fell over the streets like a promise. The orchid on my balcony opened its bud into a single white flower, perfect and improbable. I stood in the doorway and looked at it until my eyes watered. Months after the dinner, Sabrina asked through my mother if we could meet at a park halfway between our neighborhoods. I chose a bench with a view of the water and a stand of trees that made the wind sound like someone whispering a long story. Sabrina approached with her hands folded. She looked older than her years in a way that made me feel something complicated and reluctant. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. I sat. "The baby is due in a few weeks," she said. "I am terrified. I am excited. I am ashamed. You were not supposed to be the person I hurt." "I was always going to be," I said. "Because I was the one you thought would make room." She nodded and started to speak, stopped, and then tried again. "I cannot ask you for forgiveness, not now. Perhaps not ever. I want my child to know right from wrong. I want my child to know what truth looks like. And I needed to say it to you and not just think it. I did not tell her that I forgave her. I did not tell her that I did not. I said, do not lie to your child. Do not build anything on deception and expect it to stand." She nodded hard, as if the motion could nail a vow into place. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. When we stood to leave, she said, "Thank you for not exploding that night." I said the explosion already existed. I simply handed it back to its owners. She did not smile, but a small part of her face softened, as if reluctant gratitude had stepped into the light for a second. On the bus ride home, I watched neighborhoods pass that I had learned to love. The baker who ties cake boxes with string in South Shore, the woman at the corner store who sings under her breath in Bronzeville, the couple who teach salsa on the sidewalk on warm evenings near Pilsen. The city felt like a body I was learning to inhabit fully after years of thinking I had to fit inside some smaller shape. There were nights when grief visited me like weather. I let it sit. I made tea. I wrote down sentences in a notebook that had no audience. I did not pretend not to hurt. But grief did not control the calendar anymore. It did not dictate my plans. It was a guest that behaved better when acknowledged. One afternoon, my boss at the nonprofit asked if I would lead a community night where people could try ceramics for free. I laughed in surprise and then said yes. On the evening itself, the room filled with neighbors, parents, children, high school students, retirees. I watched people put their hands in clay and laugh at the way it demanded their attention. A woman in her 70s with hands that looked like they had held generations said, "This is more difficult than it looks." I said, "Most things are." She smiled and said, "That does not mean they are not worth it." Her bowl collapsed in a beautiful heap, and she laughed like a bell. The night ended with a table full of misshapen bowls and a room full of people who had made something anyway. I walked home with my hands still smelling of clay. On my balcony, the orchid held 2 flowers now, white and unapologetic against the dark. I stood there until the street lights hummed on. There were practical matters to attend to that never made their way into stories. Changing my name back on legal documents, returning a set of monogrammed towels to the back of the linen closet, throwing out a box of holiday cards signed with both our names, sleeping in a bed that felt like a field without fences and finding that I liked it. On the anniversary of the dinner, I booked 2 tickets to the symphony and took Nicole. We put on dresses and sat in the dark as the orchestra breathed, and when the music swelled, I felt something in me rise with it that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with joy. On the way out, Nicole said, "For what it is worth, I am proud of you." I said, "For what it is worth, I am proud of me too." We laughed like people who had not always laughed easily. The next day, I sat at my pottery wheel and centered clay with a patience that would have astonished me a year earlier. The clay rose under my fingers into a vessel shaped for holding. I thought, not of what had been taken, but of what I could build. I thought of the quiet well of my own steadiness. I thought of the truth that had cut through the performance and left a clean edge. When the bowl was done, I carved a small line around its base, a single circling groove that felt like a promise. I set it on the shelf to dry. Outside, the lake moved the way it always moves, tireless, capable of reflecting sun and moon and the city's restless lights. I opened the window and let the sound in. In the end, there was no moral written in careful ink across my days, no lesson that could be pinned to a bulletin board. There was only the truth and the relief of stepping into its clear air. There was the life I chose each morning when I woke. There was a flower that bloomed after a season of looking dead. There was clay that rose when my hands told it the truth of what it could become. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.